Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast. I'm Ollie Barrett, live from London, and these are the headlines. Fierce fighting continues near Ukraine's Severodonetsk as Russian troops enter the outskirts of the city that's become the focus of Moscow's offensive. Oil prices rise, hitting their highest in more than 2 months as global markets await a European Union decision on banning Russian oil imports. Ten Pacific Island nations rebuff China's push for a wide-ranging regional security pact. Talks in Fiji between the Chinese foreign minister and leaders from small island nations fail to reach an agreement. Rescue workers in Nepal recover at least 16 bodies from a crash site after a small plane carrying 22 people, including 4 Indians, came down in a remote region. And the Mona Lisa is unharmed as a visitor at the Louvre tries to smash the glass protecting the world's most famous painting, smearing cream across its surface in a climate protest attack. Moscow has set a new goal for what it calls its special military operation in Ukraine. The liberation of the Donbas region is now described as an unconditional priority. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov told a French news network that other Ukrainian territories will be spared to decide the future for themselves. Meanwhile, Russian troops have entered the outskirts of the Ukrainian city of Severodonetsk. It's the largest city in Lugansk, which is still under Ukrainian control. Witnesses say the city is being bombarded at least 200 times an hour. At least 2 civilians have been killed there, 5 have been wounded, and critical infrastructure has been destroyed.
Російських ударів в Сєвєродонецьку зруйнована вже вся критична інфраструктура міста. 90% будинків пошкоджені. Більше 2/3 житлового фонду міста повністю зруйновано. Немає зв'язку. Постійні обстріли. Захопити Сєвєродонецьк – це принципове завдання для окупаційного контингенту. І їм все одно...
The Russian invasion has killed thousands of civilians already. Over 6.7 million people have been displaced and more than 14,000 cases of alleged war crimes are being probed by Kiev. Ukraine's second largest city of Kharkiv is also facing bombardment. Local authorities claim 2 civilians have been injured in a village in the northeast, and over 2,000 apartment blocks have been wholly or partially destroyed. President Zelensky toured the city and fired its security chief for not being able to defend it.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited troops on the front line in Ukraine's northeastern Kharkiv region on Sunday, official footage showed. The trip marks his first official appearance outside the Kiev region since the start of Russia's invasion on February 24th. The president's office website said Zelensky spoke to soldiers, handing out commendations and gifts. Several explosions were heard in the city of Kharkiv just hours after the president's visit, according to a Reuters journalist. Kharkiv has been subjected to Russian shelling in recent days after several weeks of relative quiet. Russian troops have instead been advancing in the eastern parts of Ukraine. Invading forces appear close to seizing all of the Luhansk region of Donbas, one of the more modest war goals the Kremlin set after abandoning its assault on Kyiv in the face of Ukrainian resistance. Armoured Ukrainian vehicles were present near Bakhmut in the eastern Donetsk area on Sunday. Authorities had reported Russian artillery was shelling the Lysychansk-Bakhmut road, which Russia must take to encircle Ukrainian forces in the region. Zelensky spoke of the tension in the east on Saturday.
The situation is very complicated, especially in those areas in the Donbas and Kharkiv region where the Russian army is trying to squeeze at least some result for themselves. But our defences are holding up. It's indescribably difficult there, and I am grateful to all those who withstood this onslaught of the occupiers.
Russia says it is waging a special military operation to demilitarise Ukraine and rid it of nationalists threatening Russian speakers there. Ukraine and Western countries say these claims are a false pretext for a war of aggression.
European Union leaders, meanwhile, are meeting in Brussels to try and finalise a sixth package of sanctions against Moscow, but there is a deadlock over a proposed embargo on Russian oil. The package includes cutting Russia's biggest bank, Sberbank, out of the SWIFT messaging system, banning Russian broadcasters from the EU and adding more people to the blacklist. It has been held up by Hungary, though, which is heavily dependent on Russian oil. Slovakia and the Czech Republic have also expressed concerns about the package. Our correspondent Rosie Burchard reports from Brussels.
It was almost 4 weeks ago, indeed, that the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen took to the podium in the European Parliament and announced that the Commission, the bloc's executive, was proposing a full embargo on Russian oil that would be phasing out all imports of Russian crude oil and refined oil products by the end of this year, with a certain extension for the countries which were landlocked and most reliant on Russia. Now, that has proved incredibly controversial, and it has led to, as you mentioned, deadlock among EU countries. We should note that without unanimous backing from all 27 EU member states, these sanctions cannot move forward. Now, there have been various options and workarounds put on the table. EU ambassadors have been meeting here in Brussels this morning in a last-ditch attempt to try and find some sort of a compromise before leaders head into talks later this afternoon. The latest compromise that countries are eyeing is the potential to ban all seaborne imports of Russian oil, but to exclude, for now at least, oil deliveries by pipeline. Some would call that a compromise, others would call it caving in. At this stage, the European Union, there is a sense among diplomats I've spoken to at least that this deal does need to get across the line to show that the European Union remains united with this sixth package of sanctions imposed against Moscow over its invasion of Ukraine. I would say it doesn't impact their resolve insofar as Serbia is not currently a member, so it doesn't have a seat at that table in terms of decision making and giving that final backing to this accord if it does get across the line. But it does raise some very interesting questions. The European Union wants to make sure that candidate countries and the countries in its neighbourhood are on board with its sanctions against Moscow, and Serbia has shown itself to be an outlier there, rather keeping up ties with the Kremlin, whereas European Union countries, at least most of them, have essentially severed ties and continue to impose sanctions on Russia. Now, you mentioned gas there. This latest proposal for a sixth round of sanctions is about sanctioning oil, banning the imports of oil. It was supposed to be easier to get this deal across the line than a deal on gas. Gas is seen as much more complicated, harder to replace, and a type of energy on which European Union nations are more dependent compared to oil. So essentially this doesn't bode well for future sanctions, including gas, because there has been such difficulty to get this particular round of sanctions across the line.
Talks on a China-Pacific security deal have failed to reach an agreement. Several regional leaders had been voicing fears. China says the two sides, though, will continue to have discussions and consultations to shape more consensus on cooperation.
对岛国来说，中国不是新来者，而是相知相交多年的老朋友。中国和岛国关系的快速发展，也不是横空出世，而是水到渠成。中国和岛国将继续相互支持、相互帮助，坚定维护彼此的核心利益，不断拓展全面战略伙伴关系。
Wang Shi is scheduled to visit Tonga, Vanuatu, Papua New Guinea and East Timor. China recently signed a highly controversial security pact with the Solomon Islands. The deal will potentially lead to a Chinese military presence in the islands, and that sparked alarm in quarters of the West. The US State Department issued a warning saying that countries should refrain from signing vague deals that offer little or no transparency. Australia has joined the US in urging South Pacific nations to reject China's attempts to expand its security reach in the region. India and Pakistan are holding talks on Indus water treaty in New Delhi. A 5-member Pakistan delegation arrived in India on Sunday for the 118th edition of the talks. They will focus on issues like advanced flood information, the construction of hydropower projects by India on west-flowing rivers. That's likely to be a key point of discussion for both sides. The annual report of the Indus Water Commissioners will also be finalised during the talks. Water disputes between India and Pakistan have been a point of tension between the two governments, from territorial conflict to fears of future water shortages due to the construction of dams. Ahead of the meeting, Pakistan's head delegate expressed his expectations from the ongoing talks, and we've also, after that, got analysis from our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal.
So this is a part of the treaty obligation that we have to meet to fulfill our obligation so under the Indus Waters Treaty, and it is a continuing process. So we believe that this process should not only continue, but it should go, in a meaningful manner so that we can resolve at a bilateral level to the extent possible. So it depends on the Indian side as well, that how do they respond.
The Indus water talks between India and Pakistan have started today here in Delhi. This is the meeting under which both sides will discuss about water sharing. The Indus Water Pact was signed in the year 1960, under which India has the right to the 3 eastern rivers, while Pakistan has the right to the 3 western rivers. And of course, India can still use water from the 3 western rivers. Now, we know that earlier this year, an Indian delegation was in Islamabad for talks. Now Pakistan delegation is here in Delhi. This is the second Pakistan delegation to be in India in matter of few weeks. Earlier we saw a Pakistan delegation here in India for the SCO RATS, or Shanghai Cooperation Organization Regional Anti-Terror Structure meeting. Now we know that India-Pakistan relationship, the talks between the two governments is of course frozen. There is no movement that is happening, but multilateral and bilateral meetings such as the SCO and Indus water talks do provide the opportunity for the two countries to meet together and have conversations. With video journalist Chandrasekhar Siddhant Sibal at the Indus water talks here in Delhi for WION.
Next to the United Kingdom, where the Labour Party is demanding an investigation into a gathering allegedly held at Boris Johnson's Downing Street flat during lockdown. The party was reportedly organised by Boris Johnson's wife Carrie on the Prime Minister's birthday in June of 2020, and texts of hers about it have now been leaked. This has ignited accusations of a cover-up by the Metropolitan Police, which recently concluded its investigation into gatherings in and around Downing Street during COVID-19 lockdown. Carrie Johnson's spokesperson says the civil servant Sue Gray was aware of the texts as part of her inquiry into alleged breaches of COVID rules, on which she reported last week. Britain's preparing to mark Queen Elizabeth's 7 decades on the throne this week with a series of Platinum Jubilee events. The celebrations take in 4 days at the end of this week. It'll range from military parades, church services, street parties and a pop concert outside Buckingham Palace. It's not entirely clear how many of these events the Queen will attend herself.
Accompanied by the Lord Mayor, she goes on a walkabout among her people.
Thank Her Majesty the Queen for gracing us with her presence here today.
Singapore is encouraging investment in robotics and automation, partly to meet a labour crunch in the country. Robots will serve customers in libraries and cafes and will be working on construction sites.
Meet Singapore's advanced workforce. These robots. One to survey construction sites, one to serve freshly brewed coffee, one that scans bookshelves in libraries, and one to roll around, zap mosquitoes. Name a task and there's probably a robot assigned to it. As Singapore experiences personnel shortage, a fallout of the pandemic and border restrictions, these bots are here to fill the void.
During the pandemic, where borders are closed, it is harder to get workers. And therefore, because we're already used to using robots, it does help us to save on manpower.
The manpower shortage is the side effect of the COVID-19 pandemic and the restrictions that came with it. The period from 2019 to 2021 saw a decline of 235,700 workers. In a country of roughly 5.6 million people, that is heavily reliant on foreign workforce. So it turned to robots to help pick up the slack. Singapore has what you call high-density robot workplaces. As per the 2021 World Robots Statistic Reports by the International Federation of Robotics, the nation has 605 robots per 10,000 employees. Second highest after South Korea. As personnel slowly start to trickle in, the general consensus is that removing the need for personnel on site may just be a more sustainable option. That being said, there are those who yearn for more human interaction in the service industry. Here's a question though. How will Singapore strike a balance between human interaction and an increase in automation and robotics? Bureau Report WION, World is One.
Vietnam has opened the world's largest glass-bottom bridge for the public. It's found a place in the Guinness Book of World Records. Thanks for watching. Do stay tuned to WION World is One. I'm Ollie Barrett. I'll be back here at the same time tomorrow.
And it's spectacular, the engineering required to build that into the side of a cliff but maintain all the features of nature, the greenery, the rock. It's been an amazing project, very successful, and I think it will attract a lot of tourists.
I dared not to look down as I'm afraid of heights. I imagined in my head what would happen if I fell through, and it makes me too scared to keep on going.
Many other. This is right, Arab.